Okay, so welcome back everyone from lunch. Hope you enjoyed it and it was enough. We're now continuing with NeDi, update and more, presented by Remo Rickli. Enjoy.
Hello. Thank you. Don't clap yet, you don't know what's coming. No, I'm just kidding. So we have an update. The more part is stuff I've encountered while updating, so to speak. So we'll see. Anyhow, so for those who know me already or know NeDi, this might not be new, but anyways, so this is like my Xing life, or life in Xing. And the two important things are on the top. So 2001, I went to the Paul Scherrer Institute. That's where I invented and started NeDi. I could make an open source project out of it. And yeah, so that's where NeDi originates. This is a science lab, if you will, with particle accelerators. It's kind of like the CERN, but a lot smaller, and also less known, for that matter. After that, I went to HP, and you can imagine working for HP, you cannot really promote your own tools, because you have to sell those of your employer. So NeDi was a bit in the background. It was a side project. It was just pure hobby. Also, you can see I did many certifications for HP. And as I'm listing those here, you might think they're really important for me, right? And this ended in 2014. So what happened after that was that I made my hobby, NeDi, to my profession. And yeah, I'm living off of NeDi now. And actually, surprisingly, quite successfully, because obviously there is a need for NeDi, and I appreciate that a lot. So going back to the certifications, so you think they're really important for me? Yes, or to me. Yes, I put them on a wall, that's true. But I had a customer while working for HP, and that was CERN. So the last time I was there, I framed the visitor pass and put it on top of the certifications. So you see, I have my priorities the right way around. So I mentioned the Paul Scherrer Institute, which is an interesting environment. There's a lot of buildings. And one of the reasons why I came up with NeDi was that from time to time, you need to find a computer. And when you work in an environment with many of those hurdles, you really want to know where this computer is before you actually enter. Because it's something that you mind and you're aware of. So NeDi stands for Network Discovery, and that's exactly what it does. It discovers the network, it finds computers, but it started out having a small monitoring section, more or less to check whether devices or switches and routers are alive. And the monitoring in the past 2 years grew quite a bit, so I can say that you actually can manage a network now with NeDi and actually monitor good parts of it. Not everything. I mean, I'm not keen on creating yet another service monitoring tools. There is enough of them out there. But what networks are concerned, I think I can cover a pretty good part of it. And as I said, you can locate and track computers. That's a feature that's also very interesting for the security people. So it's not just networkers that can use NeDi, but also a range of other IT people. Even printer management is possible. While working at HP, I had a good chance to test that. So yeah, it works as well. I mean, printers talk SNMP, and that's pretty much still what NeDi is about. I have some news on that as well, but yeah, for now it's really SNMP devices. And as said, you can track computers, which is interesting for the security people, but there is other tasks like configuration backup, configuration management, and beyond actually, because I have some interesting news as well here on the very last slide, so I will get back to that one as well. All right, so this is pretty much what NeDi is, and this is pretty much what I showed 2 years ago, last time I was here. But I said 2 years ago, I quit my job and actually really started working on NeDi. So now the last 2 years have been really exciting as to the progress of NeDi. So what's new? Well, this GUI is not. I mean, that's probably what you remember. But yeah, there's more on that. But the discovery itself, which is like the core of NeDi, got a lot more flexible. So now if you have different needs you want to cover with the discovery, you can tell NeDi to do so by discovering certain things or skipping certain things to make it faster. And then when you discover something, you can now define scripts or write scripts and define them as actions. So if you find a new device, you can throw it at that script and then react on newfound devices or devices that are discovered, and then you can trigger certain actions for that device. Also, due to customer projects, I could greatly improve the whole lifecycle management or asset management. So this is probably not so much IT, but I think a lot of people get more and more requests with dealing with this, because you have maintenance contracts, you have various reports people want, CMDBs. So this stuff is getting more and more predominant in a lot of the tasks around networks or IT for that matter. So in many cases, NeDi serves as a tool to get what's out there and then feed other tools from it. So with that also, NeDi has an API now which you can use. You don't have to access the database directly. You can use a REST API to extract information out of NeDi. Also, and I'm naming it now, for Cisco, I have interesting features added, like you can upload a spreadsheet with all the end-of-life information, and then you can combine it with the devices you find in the network, and you can compare what is end-of-life, what is end-of-service, what is end-of-support, and then you can create reports based on that. I said Cisco because that's like the first vendor I could sort of combine it with. I'm looking at other vendors too, and I'm really interested into expanding this, because NeDi still is and hopefully will be a vendor-independent tool. Yeah. So many other improvements. Let's have a look at that. So the looks, I think, improved quite a bit now. So that's the new GUI. That's the default theme. It's still not like, you know, the whole responsive stuff, but I will get to that in a minute. But I could use the better half of 2014 to clean up all the CSS and quirks mode. So it's proper HTML5, it's using CSS, and I think it improved quite a bit, even under the hood. So, yeah. I've added, and I don't know how many of you worked with NeDi, but for example, when you go to devices list, you got this form, and it's getting more and more boxes in it and stuff. So first of all, you didn't really know what to do, or if you wanted to get something out of it, you needed to know what to enter. But now you get those kind of little reports underneath, which give you an idea of what you could want. And then you can click on a number, and it will list all those devices matching this report. This also works for interfaces, as you can see on the right side. So I've tried to make life easier with NeDi and more intuitive. So you should see a lot of minor improvements when you look at a newer version of NeDi. I did rewrite the whole context help. A colleague is working on a translation now in German. So we have English and German covered. On translations, by the way, I managed to translate much more of the GUI. So we get NeDi in Russian now, if you want, or Spanish or French. It's all on the way. So that's quite cool, I think. Now, lag support. How many of you know what lag means? Link aggregation? Any networkers here? Yeah, some? Good. So that's another thing. Out of the box, it's kind of hard to see where a trunk, and depends on the terms you use, or port channel. Cisco uses port channel, everybody else uses trunks. Which interfaces belong to that trunk or port channel? So I added a few things into NeDi that out of the box, for most devices it works, that you can see if an interface belongs to a trunk, you see in the description that lag trunk 1 is assigned to this interface. So this makes troubleshooting a lot easier. And if you see neighbors connected to that port, you know exactly what to look for in the topology. So that's like one minor improvement, but I think it can help a great deal to get to know your network. Another thing is events. So NeDi has events. They're generated from the discovery, but you could also feed syslog, and they will end up in the events table. You can also send SNMP traps, although not very well supported. They will also end up in events. And I got a user from the States asking me whether events could be confirmed. And I never thought about this. And I'm mentioning this because it's really important that I get the feedback from the users with new ideas, because I can't possibly, find out all the cases or use cases which could be useful. So I've added a one-click acknowledgement, so you can click on the ID of the event and it will be degraded, meaning it won't show up in the monitoring health page anymore or other important dashboards. So this allows you to really, I checked this event, I looked at it, it's okay, my colleagues don't have to worry about it. Very simple, and that's the goal of NeDi. Keep it very simple, but expand features and functions, of course. Now, some of you who know NeDi might remember that node stolen feature where you could mark a MAC address, like a notebook, and if it would reappear on the network, you get an alert. So that was sort of the first policy, if you will, for network security. And I got an interesting request from a university in Switzerland, because they needed a feature to turn off power for devices they don't know about. So they have their IP phones, they have access points, but everything else should not really get power because they're worried about the PoE budget. And at first I was like, right, I could develop this feature, but I could develop a broader policy feature and include this. So I migrated that node stolen thing into a policy system, and this policy system now persists of MAC address policies, which is the node stolen, it's the replacement for it. So you find this MAC address, you do something. You could even shut down the port, but you can imagine this is a bit tricky. You could also create policies and configurations. So if you do a configuration backup and you find SNMP community public in it, create an alert. Very simple. And I've seen not so simple configuration policy things, and I wanted to keep it simple. So really, in 5 clicks, you have a new policy triggering stuff on configuration issues, for example. So that's one aspect. Another one is total number of MACs. That's an interesting one because some switches do have problems when the MAC address table grows too big. Like they say, well, you can hold 10,000 MAC addresses, but it craps up after 8,000. So you can have a policy counting the MAC addresses, which I'm doing anyways, and then create an alert if this threshold is exceeded. But I could also create policies now for neighbors, so neighbor types or neighbor names. And here's an example, and that's back with this project I had in Switzerland. So we have IP phones, like they might be from Unify, former Siemens VoIP phones, which you do want to keep powered up, especially that one of the big boss. So if you turn that one down, you're probably in trouble. Also, for example, of iPhones, they could be whitelisted. So nothing happens if you detect a phone like that on the port. But then you could create a policy if that's not the case and you have any other MAC address or something, and you can add conditions like this one here. It has to have PoE enabled in the previous discovery. Because if you think about it, a phone connecting to a network, right? It boots up and it draws power. And if I discover that port that very moment, the phone has not sent the name via LDP to the switch yet. So I don't want to shut down that port because, it wouldn't be right. So you can add conditions to make sure this phone has been booted up and it's been there before, and now we can sort of leverage the information from that port. And here this policy defines, well, if it's powered up and it's matching this string or not matching this string, then you create an event, and the bell here is another symbol for my events table. So it won't do anything with the port, but it will create an event notifying you there is something connected to that port, and you should probably look at it. Now the policy system can be combined with the whole event handling, and with the visualization of those events, you can create nice graphs to see over time how many policies fired in your network. So here we can see during the day, the number of triggered events grows, and then at night, of course, it goes back down again. The second line is the reset policies. So if you fire a policy shutting down a port or turning off PoE on a switch. That's what actually this thing can do. You need another policy to reset this, because you don't want to turn off PoE on all the switch ports, because eventually you run out of switch ports, because people keep changing the port. So you want to re-enable PoE again, right? So I have reset policies, and the lower one is the reset policies that are turning power back on. And then, of course, if the guy plugs in that thing again, it will get down, be turned down again. But this is actually working quite well, and it allows you to sort of dynamically adapt to network conditions. And it's, I would say, a small form of SDN already, software-defined networking, as the network reacts to things happening on the perimeter. Now for other features in NeDi, I've improved how modules are treated, and let me sort of explain a little bit about network components. I don't know how familiar you are with them. So there is switches, like a box, and then there is bigger switches, a chassis, with line cards in it. So a line card usually is a module, but a module can also be a power supply. Now it would be interesting to see whether a power supply actually has power or not. Because what good does it do if you have two power supplies, but one of them is not having any, not powered up, right? So you'll notice when the second one fails as well. So yeah, you can get the power of modules. And another issue is that you might have a stack. So a stack of switches is several switches combined together to one logical device. And it goes even further with fabric extenders, where you have like two core devices, if you will, and a lot of, I say, remote line cards, which are actually switches connecting to those devices, but they can be anywhere in your data center. So you get this big logical object, which is managed by one IP address, but it can span a whole data center. And this creates a whole set of new problems. But I mean, they sell it to you as it's much simpler because you only have to manage one IP address. I agree to that. It is, in that respect, it's simpler, but it's also a lot more complicated because you move the troubleshooting inside that construct or inside that fabric, because you suddenly don't have your regular port counters anymore necessarily to find errors or faulty cables and stuff like that. So I've added a field to the modules. It's called module location. And in this case, we're looking at a switch. We have a line card in a chassis switch, and we have ports on this line card. And those ports might be SFPs, as we can actually see here, 1 gig base SX, so multi-mode fiber transceivers. And with the module location, I know which line card they're on. But you can see that on the interface name as well. So that's not that big of a deal, right? But if you have a fabric with a core switch, you could configure the fabric extenders with an actual location string. And if you configure it in the NeDi convention, and I'm working on that still, I will make it available for you to see in the rack view. So you know which fabric extender is in which rack. What works already, that you get the port status of those fabric extenders, and you have it at least in a list view, that you know how many ports are available in a certain rack, which is served by fabric extenders. So that's not necessarily something you see in other management tools, because yeah, it's not easy to do. And again, I'm trying to keep this vendor independent. Right now, this is actually, again, a Cisco product, but there is others out there that, of course, use fabric extenders as well. HP is working on that, or has a solution which provides that as well. I know Avaya and Juniper with their QFabric does that as well. So I've been testing a few, and it seems to work quite well. And it's important if you have big data centers with lots and lots of ports that you get something like this out of it. Another feature, an interesting one, is that NeDi has a number of reports already. And I don't know if you're aware of that, but NeDi does discovery, it does monitoring, and it does reporting. And for me, it's not clear where monitoring ends and reporting starts, because that can be really, it's a gray zone. I mean, some reports can really be used for monitoring as well, because it depends on how you build it. And NeDi's reports are really dynamic, so you can have a report created every minute if you want to get a good overview of your network. So I've added a new report, which essentially lets you choose a table you want to join with. In NeDi, everything is about devices. So you always join it with the devices table. And then you can break down your network. And this is an example of switch types broken down by locations. So you see how many switches do you have in which location. And this is very flexible, because you could combine it with the interface table. And then you see how many ports have LLDP neighbors, how many have CDP neighbors, and so forth. So in this case, you could actually see how many phones you have connected to the network and how many access points which are managed. Yeah, I can't read it that well, but trust me. Okay. So yeah, that's very flexible, and I found a lot of use cases already where people, they were not really aware of what their network looks like, or they needed to get some numbers out of it, and I could provide that within a few clicks. I showed this one last time I was here. Nevertheless, large scale is a big topic, as I think networks tend to get bigger and bigger. And with that, I also think that the demands of tools working on networks change. And with that, the demands for networking people, or people working with networking people, they get different demands as well. Like DevOps is a big topic, and I'm sure not just in networking, but people need to get tools and get data out of tools into other tools, right? So I think that's sort of an interesting development, and we'll see where it goes. Large scale in this case is the discovery bit. So here we can see several NeDi runs running in parallel, discovering a network, which right now, it's in northern Germany. It has about 11,000 switches on it. And it can break down the whole network into areas of cities. And then you can break it further down into devices per area, nodes per area, and available switch ports. And as you can see, this is a service provider, so we see how many Ethernet ports and DSL ports are available in a certain area. Also, I'm monitoring this network. You can see all those locations, and then you see the buildings where we have a failure will show up very nicely. And this particular customer was also the reason why I've added a feature where NeDi is now able to draw the network topology of quite big networks, actually, and it doesn't rely on discovery protocols anymore. So this is derived from the MAC address forwarding table, which was not easy to do, but in the end we were quite surprised to see things like this, where one leg of the network extends over a number of switches down the road, obviously, to remote locations. But if you're troubleshooting, that's something that's really important. So the information and the quality of the information within NeDi, I would say, improved a lot. And it's still, of course, going further and further. Another request, and that ties in again with the DevOps thing I've said, that you get more and more needs for customization. So you don't want to have an off-the-shelf tool which you cannot modify to do anything else, right? So I've added a few things into NeDi, and it's like a simple include, where you can define your own PHP code to do something with stuff you have in the NeDi database. And in this one in particular, I got asked from a service provider in Sweden. And Sweden is like the total opposite of Switzerland what density is concerned. So in Switzerland, you cannot drive 500 meters without seeing a house. In the mountains, yes, but yeah, usually not. In Sweden, you can drive 50 kilometers without seeing a house. And the guy from up there said that they have switches on remote locations, and sometimes they lose the CLI function. They sort of crash halfway. They still work, but they're not accessible anymore. So if you want to reboot such a switch, it can be done by sending an SNMP set request. And I thought about it, and I wrote back to him, well, you can do it yourself. And I gave him the example for that include file. So you get a new button up there. You can click SNMP reset, and as soon as you click it, the device will reboot, And you can see that's in the process of doing so. And this can be done even without me adding a new feature into NeDi. So it's quite interesting that this works out now, that people can customize NeDi to fit their needs. Another one is that, and again, I'm saying this, it's a Cisco switch, I'm sorry, networking is, the majority is Cisco switches. I'm not trying to make or advertise this at all. But Cisco has a nice feature, and other vendors do have that too. They have a built-in reflectometer. So you can test a port and the cable attached to it and check whether it has a short or an open pair. And then you can check the length of the cable and stuff like that. But this is all command line. So I've added another, it's like 10 lines of code where you can click a button. It will warn you because it will take down the connection for a couple seconds. And then it will send the commands to the switch to test that port, sleep 3 seconds, and then show the result. And this is then what you get. So you get the result of this real-time check, and you see whether the cable is all right or not. And again, this is something everybody can build into NeDi without me having to interact with you. Another thing, and that's something I've added now, so with the network, you have byproducts like USVs, and this is an interesting one. UPS, sorry, English, uninterruptible power supplies. So this is a good example where I just leveraged some SNMP values from a UPS, and you see we had a power outage at 6 o'clock, and then the power came back. Actually, we see that in the input voltage, so we had a power outage, and then the UPS, the battery up here, the charge, of course, it drains the battery, and then the power came back, so the battery started charging again, and the temperature rose while charging the battery. So it kind of makes sense, right? But it's kind of cool to see that within NeDi, and you don't really have to do much for that. So it's just built in now. Now, this is the plus more part. So NeDi was a hobby till 2014. Now I'm working on NeDi full-time, and you can imagine that's why I made this much progress. But also I encountered a lot of things, and I did not just encounter this in the past 2 years, but those are like some things that are sometimes annoying, and I don't understand, but that's my world, and that's SNMP, OIDs. So yeah, for one, that's big part of my world, but I'm trying to get away from that as well. So I'm aware that SNMP is a very old protocol, but I'm not getting any younger either. So but I try to be open for new things. And yes, so as long as SNMP is there, I guess I have to deal with those kind of things. And one of which is, so you have interface indexes, right? Now, it would be nice if they start at 1 and then go all the way down to the last interface, but they don't. A lot of vendors map it to a very much higher number. Don't know why. Maybe looks bigger. I don't know. But then the thing is, you have to, for certain things, you have to index it back to that 1 through I don't know what. And yeah, it's one thing that I learned very early, that I needed to do that. So yeah, that's not a big thing, but you will see that on many switches. But some started to index VLANs as well. And I don't know if they just learned that at school, that you have to abstract no matter what. But it sometimes doesn't make any sense, because a VLAN ID, as you might know, starts at 1 and ends at 4096. It's a 12-bit number, which is very easy to handle, because it's even a small int is sufficient to store this value. But they went ahead and indexed it to 1, 2 to 2, 53 to 3, so they're just counting up the VLANs. And I need to do another walk to index it back to the real VLAN IDs, which sucks, because I mean a discovery tool should be fast, and if I have to walk many more OIDs to get to the original indexes, it slows it down. That's why I don't like this. But yeah, a few surprises I've had in the last couple of years. And then some vendors take it even further. So as you can see here, this was a VLAN index thing on, that's the bridge table. So that's a whole different story. But here they even indexed it for the VLAN names. So I needed to add a new feature to hold a new ID to reverse map this index back to the actual VLAN ID. And that's another vendor, yeah, which, I don't know, they do interesting stuff. Let's put it that way. But the best of it, why would you index it to the same number? I mean, why even create this table? If I wanted this number, I needed this number. It doesn't make any sense. So sometimes I do wonder if they know what they're actually coding there. So I don't know. And of course, I make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes, but I just don't understand what this is about. And speaking of coding and stuff, and this is also a bit to get you guys interested in the DevOps thing, because NeDi was created due to needs, or because of needs I've had and my friends had. So I wasn't really thinking about all the fancy stuff, really. I just wanted to solve a problem. And today you have so many fancy things, and just look at that. Ajax, Bootstrap, responsive CSS, yes. So you can get lost in all those nice things, right? And maybe not solve the problem you originally wanted to solve. So for me, it's really important that I don't lose my time too much on all those things. And I wanted to keep NeDi small. So that's why I've pretty much been very, very slow on adapting those new technologies. And mind you, when I started NeDi 15 years ago, there wasn't anything of that around. But I am aware of it, and I know it's sexy, it's kind of cool. I mean, Ajax is really cool because it makes the browser app like a fat app. Bootstrap or responsive CSS is really cool because it will adapt the layout to the screen size and stuff. And of course, the whole thing you can do with the proper JavaScript frameworks is amazing. And that's part of this topic. So MVC, the model view controller approach, really cool because you pretty much have your data model and you have your controller in the browser with JavaScript talking to the database more or less and then displaying the information. So NeDi is not yet, it's not there yet. So you still have more or less a web page and then you pull data from the database and then display it as a table. That's the way it has been working. I've cleaned it up. It looks much better now, but it's not modern. I wouldn't say it's modern. But I did look at modern output, and I looked at the source of it. So if a table ends up looking like this in the source, and we're talking about a table value here and table row, but you have like 20 hierarchy levels above it, and I figured, nah, I don't want to go there just yet. So that's another reason. I wanted to keep everything really, really small and responsive for daily usage. So I might look at other options. I will look at Ajax and all that. But also, I think it's important that everybody keeps a bit up to date on what's out there. Because, as I said, I think the networker will be more and more a DevOps, or some of us will be, because the needs just simply change. So, my style, yeah, I'm an old fart. I admit it, getting gray. Oh well. So, I guess I'm also not the bleeding edge of programming here. So, but there's a few simple things. I really, when I add a new feature, I try to keep the dependencies really low. And when I see I can do it myself, I will do it myself and add less dependencies. So that's kind of what I'm trying to do. Doesn't work always, and sometimes it just doesn't make sense. But yeah, that's how I try to continue as well. Rather index than loop. I don't like the looping things where you iterate over an array. Sometimes you have to do this, but yeah, I usually prefer hashes, and still I try to keep the memory footprint low, because that's what you end up. You need memory when you create hashes. But on the other hand, it's quite all right. So those big networks, they're manageable with decent-sized machines. And speaking of memory, so NeDi has increased in size. The archive is now 4 megabytes because I changed the icons. but it's still quite manageable. So, to sum it up, you can call me a seasoned programmer, if you will, but I can update NeDi on the browser by uploading the archive. And then I have another 2 clicks to update the database, and I'm done with it. So you can still update NeDi within 5 minutes, and it's no big deal at all. And even though I'm not using any responsive CSS yet, it can still be used on tablets and even phones. And I think that's a good thing too, because you don't have to worry about it really. And it's all really lightweight. Now, if I add a new feature to NeDi, after a day or so, I have a pretty good idea whether I can do it. And it's quite usable already. I can spend another week on it to get to, you know, those 95, 90% usability things. If I would spend another 3 weeks on it, I might reach 100%, but yeah, usually I don't have the time for that. So I'm happy if it's 95% usable, and maybe the rest will grow over time. It will settle in, and people will be happy with it. But what I've often observed, if you spend too much time developing on something, the usability goes back down again. And I've seen this especially on big tools, big expensive commercial tools, that in the end nobody really likes to work with anymore, because either they're getting slow, sluggish, or just don't do what you want them to do anymore. So I try to stay away from that, and I don't have the time to do this really. So I need to get the stuff out and working quickly. So, last but not least, if I add a new feature to NeDi, and if you look at NeDi, if you know the GUI a little bit, you have several modules you can work with. So you have a list module, maybe another list module, and a report module, and then there will be monitoring modules. And if I add a new feature, you have a new module. But I've seen big applications where a new module is like an application within the application, and you can't do anything outside of this module with the rest of the application. So this is kind of cheating, right? And with NeDi, if I'm adding a new feature, I'm trying to keep that new feature swapping over to other modules and increase their functionality as well. Now, I've talked a lot about development and new features and stuff. Why am I telling you all this? Well, with NeDi 1.6, we got a great new feature in, which I meant to do for like 10 years. But now finally, I've added it, and it's NetFlow support. The basis of it is NFDump from Peter Haag. It's really cool because it's very small. It requires more or less 2 things. It's the NF capture daemon, which is the collector, a mere megabyte in size. And then it requires NFDump, which is the client, so to speak, which allows you to view the NetFlow data in the CLI. And all I'm doing is I'm running this in the background, and then I'm using NFDump to display the data within NeDi. And this is happening in nodes traffic, the new module. But existing modules, like devices graphs and node status, receive new features to access this NetFlow information. So for example, you can play around with RRDs and looking at the different protocols you might be interested in to find anomalies. Or in node status, you can click on an IP address and then check what this node is doing right now. So we'll filter on this node and displaying all the outgoing traffic for this node. And I think this is quite a very usable extension, because NeDi now leverages the topology information and all the network information it got, and it combines it now with real-time data of your traffic. Again, this can be combined with the policies. You know what policies now are now. And you can add policies based on traffic. So if I have more traffic than this for this host, or less, I mean, if you have a web server and you don't have any traffic, something might be fishy as well, right? So you could create policies triggering on NetFlow information as well. You can add this, again, to the events, and then you can look at those events in the timeline table, for example, and create nice graphs. Check out when those policies fired. So you can detect patterns, maybe. based on your traffic. Again, nodes traffic also allows you to play with what you see. So I can visualize the traffic. Simple pie chart is, I think, the standard. But what I also do is I will fetch information from the internet if you're looking at external addresses, like Google. I will go to whois, find out who this IP address belongs to. I'm trying to fetch the fav icon, so you get a nice little icon for the external site, which helps you really to identify the traffic. I've also added SAN key diagrams, and this is really interesting because you can now choose, for example, source and destination IP address, and then you can create those charts displaying the flows from source and destination. And you can see if one source talks to several destinations and so forth. But you could also use source IP and destination port for the same thing to simply check, well, who is talking at HTTPS or HTTP or DNS and whatever. And you see the relations of those hosts and the protocols as well. So this is all dynamic. You can use nodes traffic to do all kind of reporting on that. And even on the timeline, you can stack the traffic charts and then look on the progress of your traffic and find out that somebody in your household is shopping again. So those are kind of like the things that you can see with NeDi now. A big area of NeDi, or a big annoying thing maybe, it depends on who you talk to, were the maps. And I tell you, it's not easy to draw proper maps. It still not is, but I think I got a great deal ahead now. And now you can draw maps based, for example, on the left side, on a device, and you can tell how many hops away you want to have a network drawing of that root device. And then it will draw that map. It's now 2 hops or 3 hops away, and you can increase and decrease this to see what you, or find what you're looking for. Another way, or another addition now here is a layer map. It was inspired by a contribution from a NeDi user as well. And I've added it so you can define the layers. So in this example, we have a core layer, distribution access layer. But you could also use inside-outside if you want to draw a DMC map and then draw your DMC devices. And the beauty is that you define rules for each layer. And if you add a new device in your network and this device matches those rules, it will be automatically added. You don't have to touch this map again. It will just display the new device, and that's it. So it's pretty interesting also for documentation. Or, as I said, NeDi has some improvements on the monitoring side. You can create those maps and add it to a monitoring dashboard. So this is a regular web page. You could display on the big screen in your operations center. And it will display all your zones, all your security areas, whatever, even core distribution networks. And the link load, you see the links show different colors. So that's the traffic on those links and the status of the devices. You could also have a second map next to it with the latencies of the devices. So you see if something is maybe not down, but permanently high latency, or has permanent high latency issues, you will see this on those maps as well. You get an editor with it, so you can customize the looks of those maps. Either display a map one after another or all at the same time. You can scale them, you can sort them, and then you have a nice dashboard this way. Again, it's old-fashioned, so you don't have drag and drop widgets. But I will look at that. Maybe that's in the next version, I don't know. But for now, you can at least customize your dashboards. If a device dies and NeDi notices this, it will create an incident. An incident is like a major event, and an incident can be categorized. So you can, here you will see all the new incidents, and you can categorize whether it was a power outage or something, and then you can look back and make reports on that. But this one is overhauled so you can display it also on your big dashboard and then see new upcoming incidents and react accordingly. If you have a device which needs maintenance, you probably don't want to create alerts, so you can put it in maintenance mode. It will turn up blue and will not be monitored until you put it back under active monitoring. So this is also a new and little feature, but it's really important if you have to do a lot of maintenance and don't want to disturb too many people. Another thing that I'm working on right now is tagged VLANs. So NeDi was not able to discover tagged VLANs on switch ports, but the next version will be. And I've already added a little report where you can see how many tagged ports you have on a device for a certain VLAN. So if you have 2 or more ports, it's a green field. If you have no access ports, meaning the VLAN is untagged, if you don't have any access ports, you have a chip. But if you do have untagged ports, you get an interface plug. If you have 2, you get a double plug. If you have 3 or more, you see the icon as well. So this is to quickly show you how your VLANs are configured and whether you have inconsistencies. And I think this is it's getting really good that you can quickly see whether or why you have network problems or not reaching a certain network. So again, this is not quite finished yet, but it's on a good course. Also, little things, time frame entry was a bit cumbersome in NeDi because I didn't use any JavaScript frameworks. JavaScript frameworks had sliders and nice widgets for years now. I was really reluctant to add this. In the meantime, browsers support this natively. And so I could add a slider widget, for example, and improve the whole time frame entry without any JavaScript frameworks. That's kind of cool. Also, the devices list got a new feature. You can enter an OID and then quickly scan in real time a bunch of devices to check the results. Can also be very helpful for troubleshooting. As I said, a new icon set. Basically, because I had to add all the country flags, so I decided to use new icons. Those are from Fat Cow Hosting. They're pretty cool and very nice. I could improve the GUI with those again. And also, I've improved the RRD rendering, no ugly frames anymore, and transparent RRDs in the maps. Make it really interesting. Speaking of RRDs, so that was the display, that network I mentioned with the 11,000 switches being monitored. But all the interesting stuff is happening on this pixel, right? That's not very nice. So I changed it a bit so you can see actually now really what's happening. And you even see now here we had a few going down and we have a few slow devices as well. So that's, getting much better now. Now, last but not least, this is also work in progress, and it's been done like a week ago or so. I actually added the slide just today. So Peter Haag and I were working on latency measurement for NFDump. Sounds good, right? Well, actually, he's working on it. I was just nagging him about it. So, but anyhow, he did it, and it's amazing. So now if you have a capture probe with NFPCAPD, you can use this for measuring the latencies of client, server, and the application. And for troubleshooting, again, this is going to be a big advantage. And I've added a quick fix to the GUI already. So you can see when a latency exceeds a certain threshold, that's the client latency. And this client, I think, is on the wireless LAN. Of course, it will have a higher latency, and on wireless, it's very inconsistent. So you can easily see that. And if this user would complain about a slow application, you can tell him, well, it's your wireless network. It's not the server side. It's very interesting. So that's a really cool thing. And also, I mentioned that, yes, SNMP is a big part of my life, but I'm looking at other things. And it happens that I have a few partners which are very interested in NeDi doing more than just network discovery. So I've added WMI discovery for Windows hosts, which shifts NeDi from a networking tool to an actual asset management or asset discovery tool. And this works already. You can discover Windows hosts, even the connected monitors and CPUs and installed applications. And I've expanded it now to SSH. So I can discover Linux hosts agentless. So I just connect to the host, log in, or use an SSH key. So I don't have to log in. And then I can do a VM stat. I also get CPU, memory, and we're working on expanding this as well to get more information about the host itself, which then can be fed again into a monitoring tool to add new targets for monitoring. But as a byproduct, really, I managed to create graphs from it. So you can see this is a regular Linux host without SNMP installed. And you see the CPU load, memory, temperature, and disk I/O, just like that. And it's not scaling beyond I don't know how many devices, but it's not intended for scaling yet. But I'm thinking about making this multi-threaded. With that, you could easily update 1,000 hosts every 5 minutes or so. We'll see. I don't know where it's going, but yeah, it's a new thing that NeDi can do now. And another thing I'm working on right now, so imagine this customer with the 11,000 switches, he decided to move to another vendor, meaning he has to replace like 3,000 switches now from vendor A to vendor B. Now, do you really want to rewrite 3,000 configurations? It's kind of a boring job, right? Well, you could use config blocks and then piece them together, but if you have rate limits configured on switch ports or different VLANs on different switch ports, it's still very cumbersome. So I'm working on a translator module where you can use regular expressions and a source type to match config parts and transform it into a new config part, and then you can have them automatically pieced together into a new config. So this, again, is work in progress, but it should be available in the upcoming NeDi version. And it could be very interesting if you have big migrations. And I'm not aware of many tools that can do this. So, I have one more, sorry. Networking is nice and fine in the enterprise, but then often you have internet connections, right? You do BGP peering to your provider. And for now, until now, NeDi wasn't able to do anything with it. I mean, you could ping the peers, which doesn't help you if the peering goes down. So you still want to know if it's the peering is active, and you learn routes from your internet peer. So with NeDi 1.7, you will have the option to monitor your edge router and monitor the BGP peers, which will be added as fake links and remote devices. And I'm not touching the remote device. I'm not pinging it or anything. I'm just checking the BGP link if it's established. And you will see events accordingly. And on the map, you will see the status of your BGP peers. Another interesting thing, and this is also to prove that I am looking at new technologies, I have added or replaced the old Google API stuff, which was a bit iffy on the licensing side anyways. So it's all using Leaflet now and OpenStreetMaps. And Leaflet is really cool and really powerful. I can recommend looking at that for everybody. And it allows you to use plugins and then add heat maps. And I don't know what heat maps I will add yet. This is just an example. But it can be very interesting to further analyze your network. And we will see where this is going or how far I will get. But yeah, it looks very promising already. So that's it. Updates and more you wanted to hear? I hope not. So, but yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them now, or I'll stick around, of course.
Christian Nager from the University of Würzburg, networking department.
Ah, cool.
You talked about the maps that you're producing out of the forwarding table.
Mm-hmm.
Are you using any CDP or LLDP for it?
Not on this one you just saw.
Okay, that's
I mean,
perfect.
the whole network has a few LLDP devices, but it doesn't help me at all to draw those maps.
Okay, you're basically just calculating it from the forwarding
Yes,
table.
yes.
Okay, and the other one, you're doing interface statistics with NetFlow, so I could use it as like a replacement for our cacti.
Yeah, well, NetFlow is not per interface. NetFlow is, you have certain, let me rephrase that. Newer switches can do NetFlow on the access, but usually you have NetFlow capable devices in the core or in the distribution layer.
Okay.
So each and every interface, you still probably want to poll at least the important ones.
Okay, thank you.
Only one question, is it possible to change ports with NeDis? Depends on the device on the port.
Change what?
Change the VLAN, for example.
There has been a contribution that can do that. Not natively. There might be ways around it. You can create, with the -X option I showed you, or you can also send commands to a device doing that. So it's maybe not that intuitive, but it can be done, yes.
Okay, thanks.
It wasn't originally intended to do this, but it's sort of moving in there now. Yeah.
Anyone else? Well, one question from my side. You said you can get data out from the API now of NeDi.
Yeah.
What kind of data will you get out? For example, like the entire configuration of a switch, or for example, the vendor and so on?
Yes, can be done, yeah. And it's all really tied into the database topology. So it's very simple. I mean, you have, if you do a URL rewrite, you can go to the NeDi server /API/the table name, devices. And then you can add a query to filter certain devices, and that's it. You get a JSON back or a CSV if you prefer.
Okay.
And
great.
it's on the web page. It's documented.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Welcome.
Do you do anything for overlay networks like VXLAN and GRE and such things?
Yeah, good question. I mean, unfortunately, there's no real standard that's predominant, right? So it's not that easy to do, and I haven't had the chance to look into this, like on a real case. But it's something I'm open to, and I'm interested as well to see what NeDi can get out of it. And if it means I would have to analyze configs or do some enterprise MIP queries, it does support VRF, and in that case, MPLS things. So you see VRFs and route distinguishers and stuff in that respect, but not fabrics yet.
Okay, one more question, or?
Performance-wise, have you had some Have you done some performance testing, and how many values can it collect per some time frame, like per second or per minute or whatever your reference is?
So the discovery was designed to be quiet. Therefore, it's also not like scaling or multi-threaded. So it's rather quiet and unobtrusive. But I had a customer also in Germany that wanted to get information of his phones. So he had a phone, Avaya phones can do SNMP. So I did a custom discovery for him that is threaded and fetches a few values of each phone, and it can do a couple thousand phones, what was it, in about, I don't know, 10 minutes or so, or 5. I mean, it's much faster than the actual discovery. So NeDi is not designed to, for example, replace cacti, which can graph interface traffic every 5 minutes, because it's not multi-threaded. But if you tweak it a bit and you start several NeDis in parallel, as you can see with this big network, you can get decent-sized networks securely discovered, yeah.
All right, then. We have a coffee break now, so I think you're still here for questions and afterwards. So thank you very much for the nice talk.
Okay.